I've been asked to tell this story maybe 40 times since it happened. Military tribunals, press briefings, 3 separate Galactic Council hearings, a historian from the Velhari Institute who flew 7 light years just to sit across from me and ask what I saw that day. And every single time I tell them the same thing. I tell them I was standing close enough to count the wrinkles on Warlord Shayunvas's face when he said those words. Close enough to see the exact moment his confidence became something else. Something I don't have a word for in any language I speak, and I speak 6. He said, "Your weapons can't hurt us." And Corporal Myra Voss, no relation, which is one of the universe's small, cruel jokes, she didn't argue. She didn't make a speech. She didn't even look at him, not really. She just reached down, cracked open her shotgun, and started loading shells. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the silence that fell over that hangar, 300 soldiers from 11 different species, holding their breath. That silence was louder than anything I've heard in 22 years of service. I've been asked what I was thinking in that moment. Honestly, I was thinking, God help every single one of us. Set up. Let me back up, because you need to understand where we were and what we were doing there before any of this makes sense. Outpost Ferox 9 sits at the edge of what the Galactic Compact calls the transitional boundary, a strip of dead space about 14 light-minutes wide that technically belongs to nobody, which means in practice it belongs to whoever has the most guns pointed in the right direction on any given Tuesday. The outpost itself is an old ore processing station. Massive, the kind of industrial thing that humans built in the early expansion years, all thick reinforced plating and brutalist corridors and ventilation shafts wide enough to park a truck in. The Compact repurposed it as a neutral meeting ground about 30 years ago, which means it's been patched and repatched so many times the original structure is basically just a suggestion. You'll be walking down a corridor built from Velhari alloy, and then you'll turn a corner, and suddenly you're stepping over a junction where someone welded a piece of an old Terran cargo hauler directly into the floor because they needed to fill a gap. It's ugly and it smells like recycled air and old machinery, and the particular chemical tang you get when you cram too many different alien biospheres into one enclosed space. I've been stationed there for 11 months. I'm not going to say I love it, but I understand it. That outpost is everything the Galactic Compact actually is underneath all the diplomatic language, a bunch of incompatible pieces held together by necessity and welding, and the understanding that the alternative is worse. My job, officially, is combat liaison for the Terran Compact Authority, which means when things get tense between human military assets and non-human military assets, I'm the one who stands in the middle and tries to make sure it doesn't turn into a shooting war. It's a job that requires exactly 2 skills, the ability to stay very calm and the ability to read a room. I'm reasonably good at both. Corporal Myra Voss was assigned to my unit 8 months before the Shayunvas incident. She came in on a routine personnel rotation, filed into the briefing room with 11 other Terran soldiers, and I almost didn't notice her. Almost. She was maybe 24, medium height. The kind of build that looks unremarkable until you watch her move and you realize there's nothing wasted in it, every motion economical and purposeful in a way that most soldiers never quite achieve. Short hair, the dark reddish-brown of old brick, quiet eyes that were always moving, always cataloging. She was from Kepler's world, that's what was in her file. If you don't know what that means, then you've probably been living somewhere comfortable, and I mean that without judgment. Kepler's world, officially designated KW7 by the early survey teams, renamed by the colonists who actually had to live there, is one of 17 planets in the Compact classified as Category 4 hostile environment habitats, which is a very clean way of saying that Kepler's world is a place that has been trying to kill human beings since the first survey team set foot on it, and it has not stopped trying since. The gravity is 1.4 standard. The atmosphere is breathable but dense, which means you're working just a little harder with every breath than you would anywhere else. The fauna, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, the fauna on Kepler's world did not evolve with any consideration for the concept of enough. Everything on that planet is bigger than it needs to be, faster than it should be, and meaner than you'd think was necessary. The hexapod predators in the northern continent grow up to 4 meters at the shoulder. The rivers carry organisms that can strip a carcass in under 3 minutes. Even the insects, if you want to call them that, are built like they've been holding a grudge. Humans have been living on Kepler's world for 60 years. The population is about 2 million. They survive by being the most stubborn, adaptable, situationally aware, and functionally violent species on a planet that is trying very hard to eliminate them. We call people from Kepler's world Deathworlders. They call themselves that too, usually with a kind of flat, matter-of-fact pride that tells you everything about how they're raised. Myra Voss had grown up in the eastern settlement clusters, hunting hexapods with her grandmother from the age of 7, reportedly. Her file said she'd killed her first large predator at 9. It said that with a certain amount of clinical distance that didn't quite capture what it actually meant about the kind of person she was. I got a better sense of it about 3 weeks after she joined my unit, when we had a routine extraction gone wrong on the outpost's lower docking levels. A miscommunication with a Saloon merchant crew that turned into a standoff, and then started getting loud. I had 7 soldiers and I needed calm, and what I got was Myra Voss stepping forward with this expression on her face that I can only describe as interested. Not scared, not aggressive. Interested. Like she'd been handed a puzzle and was already working through the solution. She talked that merchant crew down in 14 minutes. Used 3 different trade language dialects, 2 of which she'd apparently picked up on her own since arriving at Ferox 9. When it was done, she walked back to me, looked at her own hand, which had a fresh cut across the palm from where she deflected a blade during the one moment it got physical, and said, "I think I should learn Saloon properly. Could be useful." That was Myra Voss. I want you to understand her before I tell you what happened. I want you to understand that she was not reckless. She was not impulsive. She was not the soldier who jumps into things without thinking. She was the opposite of that. She was possibly the most thoroughly thinking soldier I have ever worked with. Which is exactly what made it so terrifying when she made a decision that looked, from the outside, like it was designed to get her killed. Now the Shayun. You might know them from the newscasts. You might have seen the footage from the Vila's Corridor campaign, or the aftermath of what they did to the Marathi colony stations. Or, and this is what most people know them from, the negotiation breakdown at Compact Summit 7, where the Shayun delegation flipped the negotiating table and walked out, which doesn't sound that dramatic until you know that Shayun negotiating tables weigh about 300 kilograms. They are, in the polite language of diplomatic briefs, a martial culture with expansionist tendencies. In less polite language, they're an empire that's been eating its neighbors for 300 years, and they're very good at it, and they know it. Physically, the Shayun are, there's no gentle way to put this, impressive. They average about 2.4 meters in height, built broad and heavy with a layered musculature structure that I've seen compared uncharitably to a wall that decided to become a soldier. Their skin is a dark, rough gray, almost armored-looking, with a natural subdermal plating along the shoulders, spine, and forearms that provides significant resistance to impact damage. Their visual range extends into infrared. Their reaction time is, under most circumstances, significantly faster than a baseline human. They are also, and this matters for the story, extremely confident about all of that. Shayun military doctrine is built on the foundational belief that they are the most physically capable warriors in known space. That belief is not entirely wrong. In straight hand-to-hand combat, a Shayun soldier beats a baseline human probably 9 times out of 10. In terms of raw durability, taking hits and keeping moving, they're formidable. Their standard-issue personal shields are among the most effective in the compact. Their weapons technology is advanced, well-maintained, and ruthlessly practical. They have fought humans before. A few border skirmishes in the early expansion years before the compact formalized the boundaries. Those skirmishes went, from the Shayun perspective, fine. Humans retreated. Humans negotiated. Humans, in the Shayun memory of those engagements, behaved in the way that species who understand they are outmatched tend to behave. The Shayun High Command had drawn a conclusion from those engagements. That conclusion was about to be tested. The situation that brought us all to Hangar 7 of Outpost Ferox 9 had been building for about 3 weeks. The short version: the Shayun had been pushing into a stretch of space adjacent to the transitional boundary that technically fell within compact-protected territory. 2 small colony stations, one Marathi, one joint human Velhari, had been advised to relocate, which is a very Shayun way of saying soldiers showed up and made it clear that staying was not a healthy option. The compact had filed protests. The Shayun had responded to the protests with the diplomatic equivalent of a shrug. The compact had escalated to formal sanctions. The Shayun had escalated their border incursions. And so, because someone somewhere in the compact administration still believed in the idea of talking before shooting, a negotiation was arranged. Outpost Ferox 9, Hangar 7, converted for the occasion into something that wanted very much to look like a formal meeting space, but couldn't quite escape the fact that it was an industrial loading bay with folding chairs and a banner. Warlord Shayun Voss arrived with 40 soldiers and 2 diplomatic observers. The warlord designation is not metaphorical in Shayun culture. He was an actual military commander, the head of the 6th Expansion Fleet, and he was present at the negotiating table in full military gear because in Shayun protocol, appearing in anything less than your rank regalia is considered an insult to the proceedings. He was big even by Shayun standards, heavily decorated. The kind of alien that makes you very aware of the distance between yourself and the nearest exit, not because you think you'll need it, but because knowing it's there is a comfort. The compact delegation consisted of 3 senior diplomats, a Velhari cultural attaché, a Marathi legal observer, and because this was a security active meeting, a Terran military escort of 14 soldiers under my command. 14 soldiers, including Corporal Myra Voss. The negotiations began at 900 hours, station time. They were going poorly by 9:17. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting the talks to succeed. Diplomatic negotiation with the Shayun in this kind of context, where they feel they hold the military advantage, tends to follow a pattern. They sit. They listen with the expression of someone waiting for the other person to finish so they can speak. They make counteroffers that aren't really counteroffers, and they punctuate everything with small reminders of their physical and military capability, just so nobody in the room gets confused about the power dynamics. Warlord Shayun Voss was doing all of that, and he was doing it with a particular kind of theatrical ease that told me he'd done it many times before and found it somewhat enjoyable. The lead compact diplomat, a woman named Ambassador Thess Orion, Velhari by birth with 40 years of negotiating experience, was doing her best. She was good. She was laying out the legal framework, the established compact territorial protocols, the history of the agreements that the Shayun had signed and were now, functionally, ignoring. Shayun Voss listened to all of it with his hands folded on the table, and his eyes moving slowly around the room like he was cataloging inventory. He looked at my soldiers when he thought I wasn't watching. I was watching. He was counting, assessing, doing the math on what 14 Terran soldiers represented in terms of a physical threat, and coming up with a number he was apparently satisfied with, because every time he completed the circuit and his eyes came back to the table, there was a small, comfortable settling in his posture. At around the 40-minute mark, Ambassador Orion made what I understood to be her strongest offer, a formalized boundary agreement with a monitored buffer zone and economic incentives for Shayun compliance. Shayun Voss looked at it, looked at her, and then he said in trade standard very clearly for the room, "You negotiate as if we have equal standing here. We do not." Orion kept her voice level. "We are both signatories of the Compact Charter. That provides equal legal standing at this table." "Legal standing," he repeated. He had a way of saying things in a tone that wasn't quite contemptuous. Contempt would have been something, would have been emotional. His tone was more like someone reading a mildly interesting historical fact. The Compact Charter was written by species who needed to codify protections because they understood, on some level, that they required them. That has never been true of the Shayun. The Charter was written to prevent conflict. The Charter was written by the afraid. He glanced around the room again, landed on my soldiers. "I have reviewed your escort, 14 Terran military personnel, standard-issue pulse rifles, 3 with sidearms, the one near the door with the modified loadout." His gaze found Myra, who was positioned at her assigned post near the secondary exit, standing still in a way that only people who are very comfortable with stillness manage. "I assume the modifications are cosmetic or perhaps sentimental. Terran customization aesthetics are, I am told, quite." The modifications are functional, I said. I shouldn't have spoken. It wasn't my place at that moment, but I also couldn't not. Sheun Voss looked at me. You are the combat liaison. Sergeant Davin Osai, yes. Your confidence is noted. He said it like a man noting that the weather outside was unremarkable. It is, however, misplaced. We have reviewed Terran military capability extensively. Your pulse weapons operate in a frequency range that our personal shielding absorbs at approximately 93% efficiency. Your kinetic sidearms are more interesting, ancient technology which the Sheun find philosophically quaint, but our subdermal plating provides sufficient resistance to standard calibers. He leaned back slightly. I don't say this to be unkind. I say it because I believe clarity is more productive than pretense. Your weapons. Another glance around the room, landing nowhere in particular but somehow covering everything, cannot hurt us. The room went quiet. Not just quiet. The specific quality of quiet that happens when something has been said that everyone in the room knows is significant, but nobody is quite sure in which direction. I felt Ambassador Orion go very still beside me. I saw the Marathi legal observer exchange a glance with the Velhari attaché. I saw two of the Sheun diplomatic observers shift slightly, which from them was the equivalent of a visible wince. And then from the secondary exit near the far wall, I heard a sound. A very specific, very familiar sound. The sound of a break-action shotgun being opened. Build tension. I turned slowly, because I knew what I was going to see and I needed a moment before I saw it. Corporal Myra Voss had stepped forward from her post by about 2 paces. Just 2. She hadn't moved dramatically. She never moved dramatically. She'd just repositioned, the way you might shift your weight when you've been standing in one place too long. She was holding her shotgun. Standard Terran military pattern, though this one had earned what Myra had once described to me as field modifications, which was her way of saying she'd taken it apart and rebuilt it twice because she wasn't entirely satisfied with the factory tolerances. It was broken open, the chamber visible. She was loading shells, one at a time, from the 4 she'd taken from the pouch on her hip. Slow, deliberate, the way you load a weapon when you're not in a hurry. The way you load a weapon when you want everyone watching to understand that you are not in a hurry. 1 shell settled into the chamber. The sound of it, the small, solid mechanical click, was very loud in that quiet room. 2 shells. I watched Sheun Voss's eyes move to her. Watched the comfortable settling in his posture, not disappear exactly, but shift, become something slightly different, something with a question in it. 3 shells. Ambassador Orion had stopped speaking mid-sentence. The Marathi observer's head was craned around to watch. 3 of the Sheun soldiers had moved their hands toward their own weapons, and then stopped, not because they'd decided not to, but because they were waiting for a cue from Sheun Voss, and Sheun Voss was watching Myra and hadn't given one. 4 shells. Myra closed the break action. The sound of the action locking home was, I promise you, the loudest thing in that hangar. She brought the weapon to a low carry position, not raised, not aggressive, just ready. The way you'd carry something you might need soon. And then she looked up. Not at me, not at the negotiating table, not at the assembled room of diplomats and soldiers from 11 species who were all, at this point, watching her with varying degrees of fascination and alarm. She looked at Sheun Voss, and she said, in trade standard that was grammatically perfect, but carried the flat, Western continent Kepler's world accent that I'd learned to recognize as her version of particularly focused. Those aren't the shells I'd be worried about. I need to stop here and explain something about the weapon she was carrying, because the follow-up matters. Sheun Voss had been right, technically, in his weapons assessment. Terran standard-issue pulse weapons were largely handled by Sheun personal shielding at the efficiency he'd cited. Terran standard kinetic sidearms, the ones firing conventional calibers, ran into the subdermal plating problem at close range. If you'd given him a quiz on Terran military hardware 2 minutes earlier, he would have passed it. But his assessment had one gap. The gap was this: the Terran military issues standard equipment. Soldiers from Kepler's world don't always carry standard equipment. Not because the military allows it per se, but because Category 4 hostile environment classifications come with a set of operational allowances that essentially recognized the following truth. If you grew up hunting hexapods at 7 years old, you probably know some things about killing large, dangerous things that the standard equipment catalog hasn't fully caught up with. The shells Myra was loading were not on the standard equipment manifest. What they were, what I knew them to be, because I'd signed off on them as combat liaison when she'd first brought them to Ferox 9, were referred to in the technical documentation as Category 4 adaptive penetrators, which is a very clean name for something that had been designed, iteratively, over 60 years of humans living on a planet that kept trying to kill them, to punch through the biological armor of a hexapod predator at close range. A hexapod predator's natural subdermal plating is, by material analysis, roughly equivalent to the Sheun subdermal structure. The people who developed those shells had not been thinking about the Sheun when they developed them. They'd been thinking about not dying on a planet that had 4-meter ambush predators. But the physics didn't care about intentions. I knew this, Myra knew this. As far as I was aware, nobody else in that room knew this. And I watched Myra make the decision, in real time in 2 seconds without any visible drama about it, not to explain it. Just to load the shells. Just to say, those aren't the shells I'd be worried about. And then to wait. Sheun Voss looked at her for a long moment. His face was not particularly expressive by baseline human standards. Sheun physiology doesn't map emotion the same way. But I had spent enough time in these kinds of rooms to read the subtleties, and what I read in his face was a process happening. A calculation being rerun. He said, "That weapon is a kinetic slug delivery system." "It is," Myra agreed. "Our subdermal architecture has a compressive yield tolerance of about 1,100 kilograms per square centimeter under standard ballistic load profiles." She said it the way you'd say the weather was mild. Just a fact, just something you happen to know. "I read the compact military assessment. It came out 2 years ago. Good report." She glanced at the shotgun in her hands with an expression that wasn't quite affectionate and wasn't quite clinical, something between the two. "This isn't a standard ballistic load profile." "Then what is it?" And here, I want you to understand this moment exactly. Here Myra Voss did something I have thought about many times since, because it was either the bravest or the most precisely calculated thing I've ever seen a soldier do in a negotiation context. She shrugged. She shrugged, a small one. The kind you do when someone asks you something and the answer is so obvious that you're not sure how much explanation is warranted. "It's what we use on hexapods," she said. Climax. The silence after that statement was the kind that has weight to it, physical weight. You could almost feel it settling. Sheun Voss's 2 diplomatic observers looked at each other. A very quick look, the kind that carries a whole conversation. Then they both looked at their warlord. One of the Sheun soldiers near the back of the room shifted. A small movement. But I caught it, and more importantly, I caught that the soldier's hand had moved away from his weapon rather than toward it, which told me something was happening in his head that hadn't been there 2 minutes ago. "Hexapods," Sheun Voss repeated. His translation device rendered the word flatly, but I heard something in the repetition itself. "You hunt." "Grew up doing it?" Myra was back to her low carry position, weapon down, no visible aggression in her posture. "Started with my grandmother. You use what works on what you're hunting. You adjust the load profile for the target's defensive characteristics." A brief pause, and then, so conversationally it almost felt like she was talking about the weather again. "Hexapods are fast, faster than you'd expect for their size. They also have a pain response that's significantly delayed. You can land a shot that would take most things down immediately, and they'll keep moving for another 10, 15 seconds. So you account for that. You make sure your load is sufficient to guarantee the outcome you need, not just the outcome that should theoretically be enough." She was not looking at Sheun Voss while she said this. She was looking at a point roughly 2 meters past him, in the middle distance, the way you look when you're remembering something. "You learn," she said. "That should be enough isn't the same as is enough." Sheun Voss had gone very still. I had been in enough rooms with him over the past 3 days, the pre-negotiation briefings, the perimeter discussions, the endless logistical back and forth, to know that very still was not his default. He was a man who moved with constant, low-level authority, who occupied space deliberately, who breathed almost like it was a statement. Very still was something different. You are, he said carefully, making a threat. No, Myra looked at him directly now. A threat is when you tell someone what you're going to do. I haven't said anything about what I'm going to do. I've told you what these shells are. That's information. Information, he repeated. You said you believed clarity is more productive than pretense. The smallest suggestion of something at the corner of her mouth, not a smile exactly, the implication of one. I agreed with you, so I thought you should have accurate information about the capabilities present in this room. I watched Sheyunvas's eyes move to me. I kept my face completely neutral, which took, I will admit, some effort. He looked back at Myra. You are from a hostile environment classification world, he said. It wasn't a question. He was processing and processing out loud, which in Sheyun culture is actually a sign of genuine engagement. They don't verbalize things they don't take seriously. Category 4, Myra said. There was something in the way she said it. Flat, unornamented, the numbers carrying their own quiet weight. Category 4, like she was reading her own address. Your world classification, I was briefed on the hostile environment system. A pause. Category 4 indicates persistent lethal environmental pressure across multiple biological, atmospheric, and geological threat categories. Active megafauna predation. Chronic adaptation requirement for resident populations. She said it like she'd memorized it, and maybe she had, from whatever briefing document described her home. Basically, it means the planet tries to kill you constantly, and you either die or you figure out how to not die. And in 60 years of occupation, 2 million people, another small pause, still there. The number landed. I watched it land on Sheyunvas, the actual cognitive arrival of what that meant. 2 million humans, 60 years, a planet that by every metric should have killed them off in the first decade. And instead, 2 million people, still there. Still hunting hexapods, still adjusting their load profiles for the defensive characteristics of their targets. One of the Sheyun soldiers, a junior officer, I thought, by his regalia, leaned toward the soldier beside him and said something in rapid Sheyun dialect. I didn't catch all of it. My Sheyun is conversational at best, but I caught enough. Something that translated approximately to, what are hexapods? The soldier beside him answered, low, careful. The junior officer looked at Myra with an expression that, in any species I've encountered, means roughly the same thing. Oh. Sheyunvas unfolded his hands from the table. He placed them flat, looked at them for a moment like he was noticing them, like he was thinking about things that could go through subdermal plating. Then he looked at Ambassador Orion. Perhaps, he said, we should review the specific territorial parameters you proposed. Orion, to her absolute credit, did not visibly react. She simply reached for the data tablet in front of her, pulled up the boundary proposal, and began walking through it. I looked across the room at Myra. She had stepped back to her post near the secondary exit, 2 paces back precisely where she'd started. She was standing in that specific way she had, not at attention, not relaxed, just ready, in the way that people who have been taught since childhood that something might come out of the dark at any moment stand. Always, in a state of readiness so practiced it doesn't even look like anything. She caught me looking. She gave me the smallest possible nod. I looked away, because if I didn't look away, I was going to do something unprofessional, like laugh. The negotiations continued for another 4 hours. I'm not going to pretend that 4 shells loaded into a shotgun somehow magically resolved 300 years of Sheyun expansionism. That's not what happened. The border dispute has 7 more rounds of negotiation ahead of it, minimum, and a lot of those negotiations are going to be difficult, and some of them are probably going to fail before they succeed. What happened was smaller than that, more specific. What happened was that one very large, very confident, very powerful alien warlord sat down at a negotiating table and made a statement based on his best current information, and then had that information corrected. And because he was, underneath the theater of authority and the expanded military posture and the 300 years of imperial certainty, a pragmatic person who understood that outdated information is dangerous, he updated. He updated his assessment of what was in the room. He updated his assessment of what Terran military capability actually looked like, when you accounted for variables his intelligence reports hadn't captured. He updated, specifically, his assessment of what a 24-year-old woman from Kepler's world was carrying and what it could do. And then he went back to the table. That is what 4 shells loaded into a shotgun actually accomplished that day. Not a war one, not an empire stopped. Just, maybe let's talk about those boundary parameters again. Sometimes that's what bravery looks like. Sometimes it looks like loading 4 shells slowly enough that everyone in the room can hear every click, and then saying, very calmly, that those aren't the ones anyone should be worried about. There's a coda to the story that I didn't think I'd include, but I find I can't leave it out. After the session ended, after the delegations had separated, after the Shayun escort had filed back to their shuttle, after Ambassador Orion had stopped by to say something quiet and intense to me that I'm not going to repeat here but that I appreciated. After all of that, I found Myra in the secondary corridor outside Hangar 7. She was leaning against the wall, shotgun broken open, running a cleaning patch through the chamber with the focused, methodical attention she gave to everything. I stood there for a moment. She didn't look up. "The shells," I said. "You want to tell me how you knew the Shayun subdermal yield tolerance was 1,100 kilograms per square centimeter?" She thought about it for a second. "Read it in a compact military assessment. The one that came out 2 years ago." "Yeah, which you happen to have memorized." "I read things," she looked up briefly. "You should read things. And the penetration capacity of your category, 4 loads against that tolerance." I did the math. She went back to the cleaning patch. "On my first week here, there are a lot of Shayun soldiers at Ferox 9. It seemed like useful math to do." I looked at her for a moment. "When he said your weapons can't hurt us," I said. "I know." She held the chamber up toward the light, inspecting it. "He wasn't wrong about the standard loadout. I didn't argue with him about that. You just offered a correction." "I offered information." The smallest pause. "Clarity over pretense, he said so himself." She folded the shotgun closed. Stood up. "You think it'll hold?" she asked. "The negotiation." "Long enough for the next round, which is all we can ask for." She nodded, looking at nothing in particular. Then she hitched her shoulder, adjusted the sling on the shotgun. "I'm going to go eat," she said. "The synth food on this station is terrible, but there's a Velhari place on level 3 that does something with what I think is supposed to be rice that's actually not that bad." "Corporal." She paused. "That was," I said, "impressively controlled." She looked at me with those quiet, moving eyes. And then something changed in her face, not a smile exactly, but the version of ease that comes when someone lets a little of the professional composure down for just a moment, and you see the actual person underneath. "My grandmother used to say," she said, "that the point of hunting isn't to fight the predator. The point is to be the thing that the predator decides isn't worth fighting." She looked down at the shotgun in her hands. "You just have to make sure," she added, "that they understand what you are before they make that decision." Then she walked off down the corridor. Her footsteps were quiet for someone carrying that much equipment. You notice things like that about people from Kepler's world. The lightness of the step, the awareness in the shoulders, the constant, unobtrusive readiness. I watched her go. Then I went to write my incident report, which took 3 drafts before I figured out how to describe what had happened in language that a tribunal board would accept without immediately convening a special commission. The 4th draft was fine. I titled it Negotiation Session 7, Supplementary Security Notes. I did not title it The Time a Corporal Loaded 4 Shells and Saved the Talks. But that's what it was. Resolution. The formal record of Negotiation Session 7 at Outpost Ferox 9 notes that the Shayun delegation returned to the substantive border discussions following what it describes as a period of procedural recalibration. That's the kind of language that diplomatic records use, and I'll always find it fascinating. The way the official language smooths over the actual human, or in this case human and Shayun, texture of what happened. Procedural recalibration, like something was recalibrated. Well, something was. What the formal record doesn't capture. The way the room breathed differently in those final 4 hours. The way the Shayun observers watched the Terran military escort with something that had not been in their eyes at the start. The way Shayun Voss himself, who had arrived with the posture of a man attending a meeting he'd already decided the outcome of, spent the afternoon with his hands folded, yes, but more carefully. Listening with, if not exactly a different quality of attention, then at least a different quantity of it. The way the 3 Sheun soldiers stationed nearest to Myra's post near the secondary exit maintained, for the entire remainder of the session, a slightly wider berth than standard positioning would require. And the way Ambassador Orion, walking out at the end of the session with her data tablets and her 4 decades of negotiating experience, said to no one in particular but loudly enough for me to hear, "Today was interesting." That's also diplomatic language. But Ambassador Orion has a particular delivery when she uses it, and what she means is, "Today was the kind of interesting that I will tell in very careful language at very important meetings for the rest of my career." The boundary agreement that came out of the Ferox 9 negotiations was initialed 6 weeks later. It wasn't everything the compact wanted. It wasn't what the Marathi colony stations deserved. But it established a formalized buffer zone, initiated a joint monitoring protocol, and most importantly, got the Sheun 6th expansion fleet to pull back about 3 light days from the contested systems while the longer negotiations played out. 3 light days doesn't sound like much. In the context of interstellar distances, it's almost nothing. But ask anyone on those colony stations what 3 light days of distance from a Sheun expansion fleet feels like. They'll tell you it feels like breathing. Myra Voss was promoted to sergeant 7 months after the Ferox 9 incident. The promotion board cited, in their summary, consistent excellence in operational situational awareness and demonstrated capacity for high-pressure de-escalation. De-escalation. I filled out part of that paperwork. I used that word. She came and found me after she got the news, which I was not expecting because Myra Voss was not someone who sought people out for social reasons unless she had a specific purpose. She found me in the combat liaison office, which on Ferox 9 is a converted storage room with 2 chairs and a console that still has the ore processing inventory software on it from the original station configuration. She had a bottle of something amber that I couldn't immediately identify, which she set on the console between us. "Kepler's mash," she said by way of explanation. "Technically illegal to distill, but everyone does it. My uncle sent it up in a care package." "Is it good?" "It's very bad," she said. "My uncle is a terrible distiller, but it's traditional." She sat down in the other chair. "You wrote part of the board's summary." It wasn't a question. "Some of it," I admitted. She looked at the bottle for a moment. "You used the word de-escalation." "I did. Is that what you think it was?" I thought about it. "I think," I said carefully, "that what you did was show a very powerful and very certain person that their certainty was missing a variable. And I think that allowed the conversation to become a different kind of conversation." "De-escalation," she said again, testing the word the way you press on something to see if it holds. "Technically speaking." She looked at me, and for a moment her face was doing that thing again, the small drop of professional composure, the actual person visible underneath. "I was scared," she said. "I want you to know that, not of him specifically, but of what could happen if he didn't update. If he just decided, because some soldiers just decide this, that the right response to having your certainty challenged was to remove the source of the challenge. That would have been a significant miscalculation on his part. 14 soldiers against 40, in a room where his personal shielding handles most of our standard loads." She raised an eyebrow. "Even with the Category 4 shells, that would have been bad. Very bad." She picked up the bottle. "My grandmother used to talk about the difference between the predators you can't avoid and the ones you can. On Kepler's world, there are some things you simply cannot go around. You have to go through them. But she always said, always, that going through something is a last resort. Because the planet will throw the next thing at you, and the thing after that, and you need to still have ammunition." She poured 2 measures of something that smelled like it had been distilled in a shed during a rainstorm. "You conserve what you have," she said. "You don't spend it unless you have to." She set 1 measure in front of me. "He didn't make me spend anything. That was the ideal outcome." "What if he had?" She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that has an answer in it but is deciding how to phrase the answer. "Then we'd be having a very different conversation," she said. or not having one at all. We drank the terrible Kepler's mash. It was, as promised, awful. The kind of awful that has a certain honesty to it. Something made by hand by someone who cared enough to make it even if they weren't particularly good at it. We didn't talk for a few minutes after that, which was fine. Myra Voss was comfortable with silence in a way that took some getting used to, but that I'd come to find, over her months on Ferox 9, genuinely restful. No performance. No filling of space. Just two people sitting with what had happened and the drink that was the occasion for it. Eventually she stood up, picked up the bottle and tucked it under her arm. "The Sheun delegation is back in 6 weeks," she said at the door. "I know. I'll be here." She said it simply, not as a reassurance to me, not as a promise. Just as a statement of fact, the way she stated most things. I'll be here, present tense and future tense at once. The plain declaration of someone who had made up their mind about things. I nodded. She left. Ending line. I've been asked, as I said, to tell this story many times. Tribunals, briefings, the historian from the Velhari Institute. Different rooms, different audiences, different amounts of formal language required. And every time at the end, someone asks the same question. They ask, do you think he actually believed it, the warlord? When he said your weapons can't hurt you, did he genuinely believe it? And every time I give the same answer. Yes, I think he absolutely believed it. That's what made the moment matter. Not that he was lying, not that he was performing certainty he didn't feel. He genuinely, in that moment with the best information available to him, believed what he said. He just didn't have all the information. And a 24-year-old woman from a planet that has been trying to kill her species since before she was born, who had spent the first week of her assignment on Ferox 9 doing math about Sheun subdermal yield tolerances, who had grown up understanding that the difference between alive and not alive is very often just the difference between knowing something and not knowing it. She gave him the rest of the information. 4 shells at a time. The universe, I've found, is full of powerful things that are very confident about what they can and cannot withstand. The useful question is always the same, confident based on what? And the answer, the one that matters, the one that changes negotiations and treaties and the distances between fleets and the breathing room of colony stations trying to survive at the edge of empire. The answer is almost always confident based on what they've seen so far. Myra Voss just showed him something he hadn't seen yet. That's all she did. That's everything she did. Sergeant Davin Osai, Combat Liaison, Terran Compact Authority, Outpost Ferox 9, statement recorded for Galactic Compact Security Council Archive. Session 7 Review, Transitional Boundary Negotiations, Year 47 of the Expanded Compact Charter. Statement given voluntarily. No amendments requested by subject.